Are you
10, 9, 8.
Okay, so we're gonna do the ad.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here's your host, BizBash chairman and founder, David Adler.
Today, we're going to talk about the dilemma of the next generation of event pros. It's a special vodcast that we did where we chatted with students and administrators about how young people can break into the event and hospitality industry even today. The conversation features Briana, Stewart, and Aruzhan Toleubay, as well as Florida International University professor Dan Cormany, NYU professor Lynn Minnaert, Farleigh Dickinson University professor John Niser, and EventWell founder Latoya Lewis. The group discusses how COVID-19 has completely reshaped the industry, outlining what works now and how the next generation can face the challenges of today. This podcast is a must-watch for anyone trying to adapt and thrive in this ever-changing industry. So let's take a listen. This is a very special issue of my podcast, GatherGeeks from BizBash, and we're doing it in association with your vodcast, your 24-hour marathon podcasting, vodcasting world here, and we're so excited to be part of it. And it's all for a good cause. Tell us a little bit, Dan, what EventWell is before we start.
So, EventWell are a mental health and well-being charity. And so for the last few years, they've helped people with those two issues. They support people in ways like they do discussions, they do yoga sessions, all this sort of stuff you can get involved with. And then during the pandemic, so over the last year, they set up a separate, initiative called Event Pledge. And lots of people around the world, and definitely here in the UK, have fallen through the cracks of government support.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And I'm going to turn it over to Ashton right away to tell us what we're going to do today.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks to everybody listening in tonight. So we are honored to be kicking off this great cause with a sample of what the next generation of event professionals think about the predicament that they're currently in. The industry is in a lengthy pause with 12 million American hospitality workers out of work, and we've changed our behaviors in unprecedented ways, and all the traditions and habits that we've built over many years are out the window. One thing we learned is that we will figure out as any way possible, and that our industry will never be the same.
And can you imagine if you were graduating this year? Would you imagine graduating this year is not the most fun? We have our own event world that we need to help this next generation, who are going to be the people that are going to be rising from the ashes to help bring this industry back. We are going to hear from two of our future leaders and hear about what's going on in their world and how do they see what's going on. They are the ones that go to the eye rollers when we say something and they say, "Oh my God, that's nothing. You don't know what you're talking about." So we want to really hear what people are thinking in this next generation. And we're going to then discuss with the administrators and the people that run all the big event schools in the United States, at least, which are really all around the world, and hear what they're seeing and hear how they're approaching this next generation. So we want to really frame this discussion in how we can reshape the industry and what works and what your challenges are. So Ashton, why don't we introduce our two students, get some feedback from the real world.
Absolutely. Briana, we would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from, what school you're currently at, and how you've been doing.
Absolutely. Yes, my name is Briana Stewart. First, I want to say thank you to having me on here. I'm a student at New York University in the MS in Event Management program. I'm actually from Indianapolis, Indiana, and that's where I currently am right now. COVID took me away from campus, but it's been all right. We've pivoted to online learning, and that's been wonderful. And right now, I'm currently employed in a marketing firm, but we do events in a different way. It's like events with our clients. And so it's not events how we think of it, but it's getting back out there and being open to people and communicating. So an event in a way. So thank you.
Thanks for being here with us tonight, Briana. And Aruzhan, tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. It's honestly an honor and absolute pleasure to be here today with you. I am actually that student that just graduated December 2020. And unfortunately, I had my graduation via Zoom. So it wasn't the most pleasant time, but hopefully everything will be better in future. And just like Briana, I work in the marketing department of Bacardi. I got the internship last year. First of all, it started as a virtual internship, and I also had virtual classes online, but now we're going back to the office only twice a week. And we're also just launching some events and some new products. That's why the event industry will never be the same, but getting there.
Absolutely. So both of you are recent graduates from college and had to experience going from real life to virtual. And so we just want to know what that was like for both of you, and how did you cope with that, and how did you deal with the world of virtual learning?
So I actually currently am still a student within the master's program, and I was only on campus for 6 weeks in person. So I was just getting my first taste of New York and New York University. And then I came home for spring break, and I have been on spring break ever since. So I've been stationed at home. But going from that classroom setting that I've grown up with my entire life, I've never learned an online method. That was very difficult, taking that pivot. But I do think that it was difficult for everyone. It wasn't just an individual case. Even the professors were struggling. Every other student was struggling. Employers were struggling. So in that, we came together and we made it work, and we made fluctuations within our curriculum and how we do our projects and work together. And with that, I think we made it through. And so I'm very proud of our university and everyone who took a part of that and made it through our semester. And now everything's much better and clear and succinct.
Can I jump in and ask you a question about when did the light bulb go off that it was working, or how bad was the frustration that you were able to tell people that this wasn't working? Because you're sitting there isolated in your home. How do you scream?
It was extremely frustrating, but I think what made it work was connecting with everybody else and sharing that same sentiment, knowing I wasn't alone with this frustration and this difficulty of getting through my courses now, not being in person and having questions and interacting with my fellow students.
What was the frustration? What was the frustration? Because all the lessons we're learning from virtual learning is part of virtual events. So maybe there's some things you can pull out of that can help people understand what that frustration was as the person on the other side of the screen.
I think it was the initial shock of having to just go from something you're so used to, like in our curriculum, but also events in general. Like you're in person, you want to experience it, to now has a barrier. It's the screen, and I'm here and you're there, and we're not sharing in that same experience in what we're always used to. So that was my frustration. It just didn't feel the same. I didn't feel like I was in a classroom. I didn't feel like I was a student. I just felt alone, secluded, listening to something and not really being present. But that took a lot to get through. And I think what helped was hearing that even my professors are feeling the same way, that their teaching style was, they had to pivot and learn, and the students as well. So getting through that together, I think, is what the biggest takeaway. And if I could tell anybody, you would just have to connect with other people that are going through the same thing that you are and sharing your ideas and expressing it, because keeping it in won't help at all.
And how do you express it? Are you like chatting in the chat thing, this sucks? Or are you?
I know that my dean is listening, but yes, that did happen sometimes. I was like, this is really horrible. Do you understand what's going on? And it was a lot of that. And then I, of course, had some friends in the program I would talk to afterwards. I would reach out to my professors, express like how I'm dealing with this, and it's difficult for me to understand the information, or just feeling disconnected in general. So keeping that open communication, both socially and on a professional level too.
What happened on your watch?
Yes, I think I forgot to mention that I was actually a student at Florida International University in Miami at FIU, and they tried to do the best, like what is possible to do. For example, we had a really interesting class, which is event management by Dan Cormany, who's actually here, we'll be talking. And he tried to bring a lot of speakers from different parts of the world. And that was amazing because honestly, I think this quarantine helped us. As Briana mentioned, it was a challenge, but at the same time, it showed us that we can connect even from different parts of the world. that was the best thing, because right now, if a professional person cannot make it from, let's say, from Dubai to Miami and come to the class, right now he can easily be with us online and just share his experience. And I think in that point, it was a really amazing and new way to look at it, because right now we can do a lot of things differently, but at the same time, it can be all done in the same professional level. For example, right now with Bacardi, we do a lot of virtual tastings with Martini and Rossi. We just ship the product, but then at the same time, we're having a virtual conversation, the presentation, and I think it feels the same as it would feel if people were actually here.
I wanted to know, what did you love about the event industry and why you decided to pursue a career in it? You went to school for it, and can you still pursue that passion? I can only imagine going into a degree and wanting the closeness of events, the interactions of events. Will what you loved still be there?
I actually originally from Kazakhstan, which is really far away from here. It's 24 hours by plane, and it's close to Russia. That's why you can hear my Russian accent. But events over there, I think it's in my DNA, because we love to celebrate. We love to throw big, huge parties for 500, 1,000 people. Our weddings are just huge and so fun. That's why I think growing up, I was looking at it, and I was just taking everything I would from my culture, from people that I love, and I was looking and getting inspired to bring those positive energy and emotions to other people. That's why I tried to come to the United States to get the most excellent education ever of like events and get that experience, and then bring it back to the world and share it with everyone. And since I was a child, as I mentioned, I was so passionate about events that I think even right now we can make that happen. Like, even if the world is not going to be the same, I still believe that it's in our hands to make those events be still memorable, be still joyful and pleasant.
What did you see, before we ask Briana the same question, what did you see when you came to the United States that you were either like, oh my God, this is so cool, or, oh my God, I can't believe how bad this is? Did you have those moments?
Honestly, first time when I was working when I was working at the country club, and when I saw a wedding for 50, 60 people, I was a little bit shocked, because I expected United States to be more the same as us, like to be big events and big parties. But then I was working also at the Super Bowl, and then at that place I saw a huge difference between just weddings and mega event. That was my big, I think, insight that I took, that actually that showed me that I want to be in mega events, not just weddings or just different little events.
Briana, do you want to answer Ashton's question? I'm interrupting. I'm apologizing in advance.
I actually didn't start in events. I had a topsy-turvy way of getting here. I was pre-PA and I have an English degree. So I arrived at events after deciding that going into the medical field really wouldn't fulfill my joy in my life. And so that's when I came towards events. I just realized I always loved throwing parties for my families and my sisters, especially. They're my favorite people in the world. And just seeing the joy of people's faces when they came in and setting everything up so it would be so exciting for everyone. Like, I want to live that every day and present that to people. So I was like, I didn't even know this was a career opportunity until after I graduated. So I came into it late in the game, and really this master's program is my first taste of it. So I've yet to have actually professional experience working with events. So it really is just my education at this point. But that's what brought me here. And I think what's fueling me to get through this pandemic and my original thought of what events were going to be as my career to the reality of it now is I have hope that we will return to how it was before COVID. It may not be in the next 5 years, or maybe not the next 10, but really, I do believe that we will return in a sense to what we were before. We will have those mega concerts and those huge conventions where we're next to each other interacting. I just don't see the world completely never returning to that. And I can't give it time, but that's what's fueling me to go forward. And in the meantime, I think it's important that we bring joy to the real mundaneness of this pandemic and the sadness. And that is what fuels these virtual events. Like, we need something to do. We can't do it in person yet, but we can still give all our energy into doing it like this virtually, something for people to have hope for.
So we get beaten up a lot because in the event industry, because people think we're about parties. What is underneath that throwing parties that articulates it more? Because we're doing something much more important than throwing a party. What do you think? What is your thinking on that?
We are bringing emotions. That's everything in hospitality. It's about emotions. People want to go to eat at the restaurant, not because of the food, but because of the whole experience, because of the atmosphere, because of the aura, because of the energy. And I think in the events, they can watch events online. They can go to YouTube and just Google their favorite singer, but they want to go to a concert to feel that, to experience other person's energy. I believe that's why we have those events.
I call it that we're scaling intimacy. It's an interesting way of putting it, because that connection, like when you see someone and we're connecting on these kind of conversations that are real, because you're not, just reading from a script. I think it makes a lot of sense. You talked about the international aspects of it. I think we're like in the music, but music travels around the world, events travel around the world. What are you seeing now? We had a little bit of a conversation about what you're seeing from your colleagues and your other people of your generation and friends in hospitality in Asia. You were talking about some really interesting things that you're seeing.
Yes, actually, during the pandemic, one of my friends, he's a flight attendant. So he went to China right during the pandemic. I think it was in March or April. And he mentioned that in the hotels, there were no people. The hotel was completely like a ghost hotel. It was so empty that they only had robots inside. Robots were checking you in, checking you out. Robots were giving you food. And he actually shared some videos and pictures of that, because I think that was super modern. I never expected robots to replace humans, if we can call it. But that was super interesting, because we never knew that would happen. But pandemic showed us that maybe there are opportunities that we don't need people for some things.
Do you think we're going to see robots at events?
Hopefully no, but maybe to have, right now they have some self kiosks where you just have to show your ticket and we don't need a guard or someone. So maybe in future robots are going to be everywhere.
Can you also give me a little bit of insights? It's just us. I want to know your generation, that's gameplay. You do e-gaming and all that kind of stuff. What do you think of our virtual events when you understand the technology that's in e-gaming? Are we behind? Are you laughing at us?
No, actually, also during the pandemic, I saw that there is a platform, I think it's called Twitch. Briana, I think it's called Twitch. And they were showing some virtual concerts. And also in the PlayStation 4, they had a game that called Fortnite, and they had a concert of a favorite, the famous rapper. And I think it was pretty intense, and it was pretty beautiful and I think it's here. Like, the future is actually here. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if we will have a virtual events, maybe with some virtual experience, like glasses.
John is nodding.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And it's funny that you mentioned a Twitch concert. I actually attended one early on in the pandemic with my friends. My friend is in Spain, and then he invited us to it, and we watched it here in Indianapolis together. And it was just truly amazing that we could connect from worlds away and to this person that we don't know and we didn't buy a ticket for. But I really do think for this kind of event type to work, the virtual events, it really takes some initiative of the people watching as well to build those connections and set it up on your end. Like, we decorated our space and we got dressed up and pretended we were going out as if it was an actual event. And so I think it takes some real care for the people watching it to make it special, because we can only do so much to this level. And then if they really want to make it something, then it really is the people and who you're with that builds that connections that is missing from not being there in person. So I totally agree with you. And I will say I did have a lot of fun, which I was surprised.
Ashton, you want to either ask one more question and then we'll bring in the adults.
Yeah,
Not that
absolutely.
I'm not I'm an adult.
The adult. Absolutely. So moving forward, obviously y'all's event education was different and will still be different as you finish your degrees. How do you see event education changing or needs to change in the future for the next round of event professionals that come in, even if it's just the freshmen starting next year and we take what we've learned and implement it in new ways? Do you see virtual becoming part, like virtual event management becoming part of the curriculum? How do you think it should change to better prepare the next generation behind you?
I think that's especially now going to be absolutely necessary. We don't know how long this is going to last and when we can, if ever, return to how we did events beforehand. So definitely learning that back end of how to do a virtual event, different emerging event technologies, how to work with different computer systems like that, I think is going to be absolutely necessary for anyone to be successful in the near future. Do I think that maybe later on it won't be a core curriculum? Perhaps it might be an elective as we veer away and maybe things improve with COVID, perhaps. But I think from this point on, technology isn't going anywhere as we get farther and farther into, 2020 or this century. So I don't think it's leaving us anytime soon. So keeping up with that is only the smartest way to go about teaching new students.
Great. So do you want to bring everyone else in the room? And we'll bring you guys in the room and we can answer some of these questions later. I just want to make sure we get everybody in before we run out of time, even though we have plenty of time.
Cool. So you want me to add Lynn?
Yep, Lynn.
Latoya?
Everyone else, bring them all in. And so let me start. Let's see how we're going to do this. Okay. Oh my God, we got 8. This is the Brady Bunch one, right? I don't know if these guys know what the Brady Bunch is, but
I do.
Good. I was going to ask you where you were on 9/11, but I couldn't even do that. Let's see, where do we have on the screen? Let's start on the bottom. Dan.
Yeah.
Dan Cormany is the PhD, is the lead events and entertainment management program at the Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism at Florida International University. So say hello, Dan, and just say a couple words about your sense of what you heard from these kids.
Well, I'm proud of FIU. I'm also very proud of Aruzhan too. She represented us very well. And I agree with a lot of both what Aruzhan and Briana had to share.
Great. Let's now go to John Niser. He's the director of the International School of Hospitality, Sports, and Tourism Management at Farleigh Dickinson University. John and I just had a huge conversation the other day, and we bonded on almost everything. So what did you think? We're going to pretend we're on CNN and hearing the discussion from the important people.
I wrote, and I think I shared that with you last week, I wrote a piece that was actually published in the UK where I said that we might be creating inadvertently the best cohort of students ever. And you confirm that somewhere in how you were talking, because look down the road in 5 years' time. What are you going to say when you're in front of a recruiter who's going to say, what were you doing in 2020? If you answer, I was watching Netflix and I saw all the series, that's not going to wash very well. You're going to have to. So the people who are going to make it are the people who have done something and who've shown the grit, the determination, certain qualities that employers are looking for. I also think that the conversation is going in the direction of saying that the jobs are going to change. And part of it is the conversation around investors is, are we doing quite well without so many people working for us? And that's a terrible thing, because that's going to put a lot of pressure on how we do business. And I think we've been forced to do business smarter. We've been forced into adopting technology. We've got a whole generation of people that have bonded in that technology. And you talked about that, how you were bonding with your faculty and all that. That's terrifically important, because it's actually changing the way in which we communicate. And so you can imagine things that 2 years ago, Briana, you were talking about that concert. Would you have thought of that 2 years ago? Probably not. You know what I mean? Now you've got that in your repertoire, and you can use that and you can deploy those skills. I think, to me, there's always a message of hope in these things. There's collateral damage. Any pandemic, war, major catastrophe has got terrific collateral damage, and it's horrible. And we have to do what we can do to minimize that, mitigate the effect. But at the end of the day, as an individual, you've got to go forwards, and you've just got to fight with what you have.
That's great. I just can't wait for the first trade show on Twitch. That's going to happen. Lynn Minnaert, from the academic chair and the clinical associate professor at the Jonathan Tisch Center for Hospitality in NYU, I've worked with NYU. I'm on the board of one of their boards, and I love working with NYU, and I've done it for years. And they're one of the great hospitality schools, as are all the others. Lynn, what did you think from what you heard, and is it what you hear every day in your job?
Well, it is and it isn't, because of course Briana and Aruzhan are both incredibly talented, polished students who come out here and put their best foot forward. We've definitely seen that, and we've seen the upside. And then we've also seen, of course, the downside of online learning and how it was difficult. So I definitely don't want to pretend it was all smooth sailing. But what these students have both pointed at is they've really seen the industry build the plane while it was flying it. And I think there's a lot of benefit in that. We had the CEO of Emerald with us last week, and he said we try to recreate trade shows virtually as a trade show, recreating the in-person experience. It didn't work. It was a terrible idea. And so now we're changing and we're trying something completely different. So I think that is really interesting to see. They see on the front lines really how the industry is recreating itself. And some of it might turn back to what it was before, and some of it will be completely
How did you
new.
feel when evolution on your hands, when they said they didn't like what they were getting virtually? Did you take that criticism?
Yes, I think most universities, will be honest enough. When we were all asked to pivot on a dime to online learning, that was an uphill battle, particularly for some of our faculty who were maybe less used to online teaching, who were opposed to online teaching. It wasn't easy, but I'd like to think that, again, we have built the plane while flying it, and the plane is getting better. But I can't wait for it to be a real actual plane again, I got to say, and have students in my classroom with me.
Before we go into a general conversation, I want to introduce Latoya Lewis. And I want to preface this by saying every time I do an interview on GatherGeeks or any time I do something with events, and I ask the question, like, when did you start? Everyone seems to say in high school. They did something in high school and their eyes light up like it was the most magic thing that they ever did, whether they realized they were in the event industry or not. And so Latoya is the head of executive director of EnventU that helps kids who are not in some of the best schools in the world understand the power of events. And I see their eyes light up when they are introduced to this world. So high school is also a key part. We'll talk a little bit about what you're up to and how it impacts what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, David and Dan, for having me here. EnventU is a workforce development program that targets high school students to teach them different career paths within live events. And so I know, just like you, Briana, your story sounded just like mine. I had a first career before events. I had no clue that there was even a pathway to this industry. And I realized that I was doing event in high school and I didn't know it. I was doing prom, I was doing selling candy, dances, and things like that. And so I thought that there would be real value to introduce high school students to this industry that has so many different opportunities. No matter your personality type, there's really opportunity and variety within our industry. And that if you're not have the access to college or the opportunity to go to college, that you can still have a pathway and a pipeline to these types of careers and these opportunities. Very happy to be here today. And as I was listening to the conversation and similar to what you were saying, Lynn, I was part of the music industry when Napster came along, so I'm dating myself. And we had to absolutely build the plane at the same time. There's so much value to be a part of an industry that's going to transition. You have to learn and grow as it's going. And so for all of the negatives that the pandemic has brought, I agree with you, Aruzhan, that there's been a lot of positives as well in that.
So let's go into the conversation a little bit. First of all, I want to say that being an entrepreneur is like flying a plane while it's being constructed too. And I'm sure all of us that have done it. And every event is almost like that when you think about it. But how has the pandemic really influenced the way you're changing education? Are there any structural changes that you're seeing? And also, what are you teaching? What is an event school? Because people don't really understand. There's so many aspects to events and that it's not, the whole trade show side of it is incredibly important. The economic impact is important, and the bringing people together and the solving problems. When you think about what an event is, what is it? How do you teach it? That's a broad question. We're not going to answer it in the next 20 minutes, but give us your insight. Lynn, you want to start?
Sure. Just to give an idea of what the program would usually look like for us at NYU, it's a really left brain kind of program. On the one hand, you have your business core where you learn the more technical side of events, finance, marketing, contracts and risks, etc. And that is the side of the detail-oriented side. And then on the other hand, you have the creative side that perhaps goes more into design, production, operations. And so we try and combine those two things with as much industry input as possible. And David, I know you're a big part of that. So trying to make it as applicable to real life as we can.
But it's the broad industry. When you think about events, there's so many things that you can go through. And like we get tarred with the party thing, which is a 4-letter word in the event business. But you learn from all of that. So how do you get people on a career path? How do you get them into trade shows? How do you get them into concerts? How do you get them into other types of hospitality that have more action, let's say?
Our faculty play a massive role in that. So our faculty are usually event professionals. And I'm sorry if that was aimed at me. I'm not too sure where you're looking at.
We're going to move. Everybody has plenty to say. That you guys are professors. So I got a feeling this is going to be, we're not going to have any moments of silence.
So the faculty play a massive role. And then, of course, we have specific subjects and courses on certain types of events. And then we bring in special topics. Like, for example, we're going to do a not-for-profit event course. Next semester, we might do one on weddings after. So we have the niche topics and then the broader field as well.
John, how do you guys think of education? How has it changed dramatically in this moment?
As you were answering, it's really good, Lynn. You answered first, but it gave me time to think. But I've been talking with my faculty about the kick in the butt that education has received a lot, because what's happened now has really made us think much more deeply about what are we actually doing here? What's the purpose of this? And how audible are we as educators to a generation that is seeing things differently, experiencing things, consuming things differently? I think.
What did you discover?
You have to start with the basic understanding that the monopoly of the production, dissemination, distribution, storage, and consumption of knowledge is lost to universities. We don't have that monopoly anymore. We give a stamp, we give a degree, but that's a very weak business proposition if you think about it. And you can go and fetch information in a lot of places outside of the university that's more current, that's more entertaining, that's in easier bite-sized modules. We've all experienced it, okay? If we have a problem with Excel, we don't go to college, we go to YouTube. We've done it, all right? So I think this is where we're thinking. In practical terms, when you look at the entertainment business, I am an enormous believer in the Renaissance person, because I think that to put on an incredibly good event, you've got to have an enormous cultural repertoire, deep cultural repertoire. You've got to know something about opera. You've got to know something about Camus. You've got to know something about the Chinese culture. And if you don't, if you lock the student into some kind of stereotypical ways of looking at the party, as you said, you've not done your job. You've missed the point somewhere. And that comes to the fundamental difference between a technical side of education. I think, Lynn, you were addressing that in a certain sense, which is the mechanical side and the vernacular you need to have to be able to work in an industry, with the real difference of university does, which is changing the way people actually envisage the world by giving them a larger repertoire, a largely library of experiences they can draw on.
Isn't art events at university mirror what goes on in the real world too? Going to school, going to a class is an event.
Except for one thing. So one recruiter once said to me, one thing you don't do is you don't teach about conflict. And I thought, yes, we at universities, we're really good at avoiding conflict at any cost. We'll do everything we can not to have conflict between the students, between the faculty. But when they go out in the real life, there are certain things that are there. There's a cruelty that's a real life that is very difficult to replicate in a play environment. And I'm going to say play environment, thinking of Winnicott and play and reality in this kind of context.
Before I go into Dan, I want to give permission. Can I get permission to the students and the recent graduates to call us out on any BS? Okay. You can pick up your permission. Okay, Dan.
Before I start talking. Well, there's also a different way that the students are learning. I've been teaching I've been in higher education on and off since the 70s. And the students don't read anymore. It's very difficult to get them to sit down and read through a textbook. When I was in Silicon Valley, Cisco was saying that 80% of the information that's absorbed from the internet now is in videos and in pictures. And we use a lot of those to teach in the events program here because we want to get them thinking creatively. But I agree with John's comment about conflict too. And the more that we can get the students out and working unfortunately in Miami, New York too, but in Miami, there's lots of events that they can volunteer for and work for. But that's where they begin seeing the real world. And that's where the click between what we're talking in class and what is actually happening, that's where that clash kind of happened, I think. Aruzhan did a lot of, Aruzhan did a lot of volunteering for us. I couldn't keep her in class because she was constantly volunteering and going somewhere to do something. But that's why she was one of our top graduates, because she had that experience. And with the pandemic, we've had the opportunity to bring in a lot of speakers through Zoom. And it's been kind of interesting because they are going through, in some ways, the same redefining as we are. And it's almost a sharing of what they are and who they are. And some of them are rather proud. We had one the other day that comes from a general service contractor perspective. And he was the one that was responsible for setting up the entire operation at Miami Beach Convention Center for the pandemic when they converted that into a hospital. And we had others that were talking about how they learned how project management skills that they had that they thought were just event skills were now doing drive-through testing and so forth. So there's a lot of, I think, rethinking what our skills are, not only on a higher ed sense, but in general.
I think that you're 100%. I think that what I'm seeing is that event organizers are now getting the respect of the C-suite because they are the closest people to both customers and employees, and they're being turned to. It's, oh my God, what do we do now? And they know, and that the cultural officer aspect of it is becoming more evident. And I think it's a good thing. Lynn, you were about to say something before I cut you off.
Oh, I wasn't. I think maybe it was Latoya you saw.
Okay, Latoya, did you have anything to say? I'm sorry. Latoya's.
No, It is, but I'm feeling really great about what I'm hearing because we actually have a course on conflict resolution that we teach our young people because they're just forming their professional selves. And as we know, in your teenage years, you probably dive into conflict. You probably want conflict. And so you can't always do that. But I think, speaking from EventU standpoint, we changed our curriculum, or actually I should say enhanced our curriculum in response to 2020. We've added courses on pandemic response and event safety and virtual events. We're working to try to teach our students early on, before they get to the industry, these kinds of softwares that we'll have to learn as we professionals will have to implement these events. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the social justice and the protest events that we saw in 2020. We also have added a lesson about that because, as we all know, revolutions start with the young. They start in the streets with young people, and our young people are very impassioned about going on, and they want to be a part of that. And why not teach that there's a way to do that? So we absolutely have listened to what's happening in society and tried to bring the current environment into the classroom.
How has for the teachers and the professors, the equity movement, have they infiltrated your curriculums as well in smart ways? Lynn?
Oh, absolutely. There's already, I think, at NYU a growing trend to have more IBDA courses and material in what we do, but then it became such a in-your-face requirement to do it, and if you weren't speaking up, or if you weren't lending support, you were definitely faulting other people rather than just not addressing the problem. So I wouldn't say it's an event-specific field, though. It's something that is touched upon throughout the whole university and the whole curriculum. But yes, of course, it has influenced what we do.
Yep.
From anything from recruiting to the kind of speakers we bring in, etc. It's permeating every aspect of what we do.
I think we're also in the end of the world where you go to a conference and they're all white men on the speakers.
Right.
People are thinking about that a lot more. John?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a recent immigrant. I'm only 10 years in America and got my citizenship 2 years ago, actually in Indiana, so fellow Hoosier. But when I came here, I was shocked because Europe is so multicultural by the nature of how Europe is, that the conversation, yes, there's a conversation about the past, but it's not at all the same here. And it took me some time to adapt to the sensitivity and to the reality of America, which is obviously very present. I think universities were a little bit ahead of the game in many respects because they'd already done a lot for inclusion, especially in public universities. I was working for Purdue for 10 years and 11 years. And, Purdue's a big public university and had to have policies and everything was in place already before. Now, I think the challenge is not adding a course. The challenge is actually deeply having this part of every course, having the right attitude towards inclusion everywhere. It's a little bit, it's the same conversation we have about sustainability. In the beginning, we had a course on sustainability. And that's okay, but it's not a good approach. Sustainability has got to be everywhere. Inclusion has got to be everywhere in all the conversation, in everything we do. Otherwise, it's meaningless. The other thing I think is whether we want it or not, it's happening. The young people, I know somebody said that they're on the streets, they're voting with their feet. As educators, we're following a trend in a certain sense, which is not good because we should be actually preparing young people. My fear in this is that we have got to be extremely careful to keep the conversation completely open. Otherwise, there's going to be we're an easy target. And you've seen this in the past few months, how easily the opposition, if you like, the people opposing this view, can actually use our own weapons against us. And that, I think, is the danger. And we've got to be very careful about this.
Let's take a break to go to the students and let's hear their feedback from what they're hearing and whether you see this, what we're saying, actually happening. And do you agree with these people that have been educating for years and years? And how do you see the future based on what you've heard from them? Either one of you can start. You're our stars, by the way. Briana?
I can go ahead and start. Yes, I would say that I agree with everyone speaking thus far. I know you allowed us to call out anything we think is incorrect, but so far I agree with everything. And I've seen it in work within my curriculum at NYU, especially going back to having the real world events and real world situations implemented in the classroom. All of our professors are professionals themselves. So that was a huge difference from my undergrad, where they're just educators primarily. So they're professionals first, and then they became educators. And so having that kind of experience to go off of. And then all of our projects were always based in real world situations where we have to actually contact vendors, contact venues, and negotiate with people, talk to them, get real information and not just hypothetical. So I would completely agree that on that front, this education has been A1, 100% wonderful. And going to the diversity that Mr. Niser was just touching on, I agree that at least I can see in the NYU campus, it has become so prevalent that it's just embedded in our culture. And it's only when that happens that I think we're going to see actual appreciation and change. Like, it cannot just be a course or 2 weeks within a course where we talk about diversity or something like that. It has to be there 100% of the time. And it just has to be, it's not an afterthought, but it can't be something that we can just easily point out, like, oh, that's diversity. Like, it should just be there no matter what. If we're not going outside and seeing the classroom reflected on the streets, like the people that we see out there and then reflected like in our faculty and our students, like, then there's an issue. But so far I haven't seen that. So I'm very happy to say that about NYU.
Good. What do you think, Azor?
I also agree with everyone, and I think it's so important to have both sides and to learn both sides of events, to go to classes and be able to hear all the technical parts and everything from inside, but at the same time going to actual events and get the experience of the real world is also so important, because without that, I don't think it's, again, I think you can do it online, you can Google it, how to create your event, but the point of going to university and get to know people and learn from professionals is that you get both experiences, both like hands-on experience and lectures.
No, go ahead, John. Dr. John.
Yeah, just something came to my mind as you were talking, Azor, and it comes from a book, The Hotel, from Sander van Strauss, and he traces back the history of the hotel. And he says, the hotel, he says, is the neutral meeting ground. Okay, it has to be neutral meeting ground. Otherwise, it defeats its own purpose. And I think that is true for events as well. Events have to be a neutral ground, because otherwise it's an impossible situation. I think we may not have been taking advantage of the very deep fractions in our society to teach our students to be neutral, because that's going to be a very important skill as you go along in your career. Not, to have that very, and amongst other nationalities, I'm Swiss and I've spent most of my time in Switzerland. So neutrality, I know, right? Born and bred in neutrality. But it's a very arduous route, because it's it's not a question of not taking any stance, but it's a question of not taking sides, and and we may not have actually done that. I don't know if Lynn or Dan, you can comment on this, but I don't feel we've taken advantage of the situation as much as we could.
Dan?
I've been asking our students to write down questions for guest speakers who are coming in before they come in. And I have been amazed this semester how many have been asking about conflict with vendors, conflict with clients, with other meeting planners. And we have not really talked that much about conflict directly. So I'm not sure where this is coming from, but it's certainly a topic that has been coming up in the question and answer sections in the classes.
Ashton, do you have any? We're getting down towards the end. I want to make sure that Ashton is the closest person to the ages
2 or 3
of
minutes. 2 or 3 minutes. Fantastic discussion, which people are really enjoying.
Okay,
crack on.
Great.
Yeah, of course. A final question to round out this great conversation. I feel like the event industry, as we're rebuilding, we're really getting a chance to renew the industry as well. And much like all this conversation has been about, just taking recent events, both historical and the pandemic, we can really rebuild the industry. So there's obviously some things that weren't working before, and now we have a chance to fix them, because everything's almost starting fresh. where do you think that this pandemic and social events uprising give us an opportunity to redefine the event industry?
Who wants to go?
If I can jump in, I think one of the big things that we've learned, and maybe Ashton, it doesn't address your question entirely, but it's to not replicate online what we do in person. I think that has really been a big learning. There's all these computer programs that emulate, you walk into a room and you can sit next to someone, and it doesn't really work because we've been too literal. And I think we might see that vice versa as well, that maybe once we go back, we take some of the best parts of online, try and put them in real life, and some of it may work and some of it may not. And I'm sorry if you can hear the sirens, that's New York for you.
If I can say something, and I'm a Piagetian psychologist, and Piaget did a lot of things wrong, but did a lot of things as usual. He talked about how you appropriate the instrument. There's an instrumentalization of technology that has to happen. You can only do that by actually manipulating it, working with it. And I think that's probably the big takeaway, is that, and I think it was the students who said at the beginning, we had to work around the problems together. They instrumentalized the thing. And from as a psychologist, I find that absolutely the most fabulous statement, because it is really at the heart of learning. Learning is not, it's not drinking the stuff, it's actually building the stuff inside you. And when you build it with other people, it's an incredibly strong sort of knowledge that you have. I think that's what we've learned.
And we've learned not only, but we've also learned to capitalize on some of the other skills and other skill sets like television producer or television director, types of skills that are necessary for virtual events. And those are going to be expected of us still in hybrid events as well, too. So I think we've operationalized, as John put it, the stuff that we've had to work with, but we've also reached out to other.
I'll round out the adults, as you say. I would agree with that. I think that technology is always the driver of change, it's the driver of transformation, but nothing will ever replace coming together as people, as face-to-face. It is a Maslow hierarchy in need. And so I think for us as an industry, it has reaffirmed that we'll transform, but we'll never be replaced in that way. And that should make anyone coming into this industry feel really great about coming into it. There will always be an event industry. It will transform just like every other industry. But at the end of the day, the coming together, the being together, that is a priceless experience that will always be there and always need people to orchestrate it.
I completely agree with Ms. Latoya Lewis on that last point, because as I stated earlier, I have such hope that we will return to being in person, but this is in the meantime kind of thing. But what I'm most excited for moving forward for our industry, we are learning at the same time that we're experiencing all of this with technology. I wonder what would happen if we partner with people who are maybe in the gaming industry on that side of things and learning from their perspective, because they've done so well in capturing an audience and being engaging with having technology. What we can do if we work with them and learn from that industry and to make our events more provoking and wonderful and for the future.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter at GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on.